Hello, everybody. Good to see you again. Let me ask you something, though. What if the Iran war isn't really about Iran? What if Ukraine isn't really about Ukraine? What if NATO isn't really about NATO? Because when you stop looking at the parts and you look at the whole, something becomes very clear. The media, now, let's catch it this way. The press is pressing each story down into its own box. Iran war story, NATO story, Russia sanctions story, Ukraine story. Each one covered like it's standing alone. Each one presented like a separate emergency. But here's what they're not telling you. Nothing stands alone. Project 2025 was almost 900 pages of policy across every federal agency. You know why they wrote it that way? Because when something is that complex, when it's that fragmented, nobody can hold the whole picture in their head at once. That was the design. What you're watching right now in foreign policy is the same architecture. Different grip, same blueprint. Walk with me here. February 28th, the U.S. and Israel launch an air war on Iran. Oil prices spike. Strait of Hormuz gets blockaded. Now Trump turns to NATO, our European allies, and says, send your navies to open that strait. Europe says, no, this is not our war. So Trump threatens to cut off weapons to Ukraine if they don't comply. Let that land. The Iran war becomes the lever to redirect NATO's attention, NATO's resources, and NATO's political will away from Eastern Europe, away from Russia. Now here's where it gets cold. Because of the energy crisis created by the Iran conflict, Trump lifts sanctions on Russian oil. 6 out of 7 G7 nations said don't do it. Germany's defense minister said the only thing that forces Putin to the table is cutting off his oil revenue. This does the exact opposite. And the Kremlin, well, they welcomed it. Said, quote, our interests align. But wait, there are reports that Russia is providing targeting data to Iran to attack U.S. assets in the Middle East. And the response from Washington? Silence. And a tax cut for Russian oil. Follow the money. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk said it out loud. He said, the threat of NATO's breakup, easing sanctions on Russia, a massive energy crisis in Europe, halting aid for Ukraine, it all looks like Putin's dream plan. A former NATO ambassador said this is the worst position NATO has been in since it was founded. And here's the tale they keep missing. Before the Iran war, Trump created the Board of Peace, a parallel global body outside UN authority, with Putin invited in, without authorization from Congress. Before the war, bilateral economic arrangements were being set up to replace treaty-based alliances. The Iran war didn't create this situation. The Iran war was the execution of a plan already in motion. Here's what you need to understand. The confusion is the strategy. Everything hits at once. Iran, NATO, Ukraine, tariffs, sanctions, Greenland, the peace board. Your brain wants to triage. It wants to pick the most urgent story and focus there. But the goal of the strategy is the triage. The goal is to fragment your attention the same way they fragmented the policy. So don't watch the parts. Watch the pattern. Who benefits from a fractured NATO? Russia. Who benefits from lifted oil sanctions mid-war? Russia. Who benefits from Ukraine aid being redirected to the Middle East? Russia. Who benefits from a parallel global body that bypasses the institutions built specifically to contain Russian aggression? Russia. Every move has the same fingerprint. That's not a coincidence. That's a blueprint. I'm Keith. Watch the pattern. Connect the dots. Thanks for showing up for Keith Speaks.